Alright, hello again. This is Jeff Scott, your instructor for the online version of 152, 157 website development XHTML, CSS for the fall 2015 semester at Blackhawk Technical College. What I'm going to do right now is to try to go over the lab portion of Chapter 7. And remember, with Chapter 7, here are our objectives. All right, relative hyperlinks. We talked a little bit about this before. Having a hyperlink for a named fragment on a page, providing for accessibility with HTML elements. The main part, though, is probably the last half. Configuring a 3-column page layout with CSS, so we'll look at that. Configure CSS for printing. Describe mobile design best practices. Configure web pages for mobile display via the viewport tag. Apply responsive web design techniques. And apply the new Flexbox layout model. Probably this will take more than, I would guess at least, than just one lecture. Alright, so as we start in here, I've gone over relative hyperlinking. I went over that before, so I'm not going to spend any time on that. But these fragment identifiers, I do want to talk about them. I want to show them to you. And I want to show you something that I promised in the past I was going to show you, and I found. This is something I created a long time ago, and I'm going to put that out there along with the other stuff. I'll just put that, it'll be out there under probably the in class. I don't really know, but it'll be, and it's called Mount Rushmore. But notice the father of Rushmore, ready for, so what comes after the father of Rushmore? Ready for change, right? So if I click ready for change, well, nothing happens. But how about mixed signals? Nothing happens. All right, well, that's a great start. But notice if I'm in mixed signals and I go and click back to top. See how I get back to the top? Not sure why those aren't working. But also, this is right here, this is what's called an image map. Notice if I put my mouse around George Washington, and most of George Washington, I did the best I could, and I click, there's the area that I have, and you go to George Washington's homepage. With Jefferson, same kind of thing. You'll notice I've got it set up there. If I click, I go to Jefferson's homepage. All right. Roosevelt, I go to Roosevelt's homepage. And finally, Lincoln, I go to Lincoln's homepage. All right, so this is something we talked about in an earlier chapter, and I'd mentioned to you that I was going to do the best I could to try to find that. Why this isn't working right here, I'm not sure. But what that's supposed to do is it's supposed to move you down to that part of the page. Maybe I left something off. I didn't think that I did. But all the back to tops on here should work. All right. So that's out there if you have an interest in seeing it. So that covers the fragment identifier part. So I'm not going to go over that at all. Her example is just fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but like I said, all right, we've talked about this also. These roles with landmark roles with ARIA. It says you've seen how easy it is to code hyperlinks to sections of web pages. The W3C's Web Accessibility Initiative, which is WAI, has developed a standard that's called ARIA, Accessible Rich Internet Applications. Notice it says it provides methods intended to increase the accessibility of web pages and web applications. The bottom line is this. If you're a web developer and you're working for a company, and let's say that you have some kind of a product and you are responsible for all the work on the web page or the website for that product. Anyone's money is as good as anyone else's. So you want to make the website, you want to make sure that the website is accessible to all. Because if you're pitching a product, let's say it's some kind of a tea, okay? Just came to mind. And do you really care if the person who buys your tea is blind or is not blind? As long as they can come up with the money, you don't care. So you want to take your website for this tea, and you want to make sure that it is as accessible to all as possible. And they give you some steps here. I'll let you read those on your own. We went over here and talked about target equal blank to open something in a new window, and I think I mentioned this before, but I want to just bring it up one more time. the whole idea of what's called Netiquette. All right? And Netiquette is basically your etiquette on the net. All right? And I wasn't sure which page it was on, so core rules of Netiquette. Let's look at those. All right. So let's look at these just for a second. Number 1, remember the human. All right? The golden rule your parents and kindergarten teacher taught you is pretty simple. Do unto others. All right. In cyberspace, we state this even more specifically. Remember the human. When you communicate electronically, all you see is the screen. Some people don't realize that supposedly when you talk all in caps, you're yelling. They don't know that. Or they might have the caps lock key on inadvertently or whatever. Number 2, adhere to the same standards of behavior online that you follow in real life. Now, depending on who you are, that may or may not be really worded well. All right? For example, I'm a very impatient driver. I get really frustrated by people who are in a 65 mile an hour zone that are going 60, for example, and they're in the left lane. All right? But over time, I've gotten over it a little bit. I don't think I'm as bad as I used to be. And in much the same way, when I'm online, sometimes somebody will send me something, and I've got to remember they might be having a bad day. Somebody else might have sent it for them. There's a lot of different things that could happen. Know where you are in cyberspace. Real important rule regarding that is don't put anything out on the internet that you wouldn't mind anybody reading. Anybody. And once it's out there, it's out there. You probably have heard that before. Respect other people's time and bandwidth. Don't link to other people's pages unless you have their express permission to do so. Make yourself look good online. For many companies, their whole what's the word I'm looking for? Their whole image, whatever you want to call it, is an online image. Their whole presence. Share expert knowledge. You may have heard of things that are open source. When things are open source, what happens is someone develops them and they make the code accessible to everyone so that other people can look at it, make changes to it, make recommendations to make it better. All right? It shouldn't be an us versus them mentality. We should all be us. Help keep the flame wars under control. Flaming is what people do when they express a highly held opinion without holding back any emotion. You know, it's the kind of message that makes people respond sarcastically. Oh, come on, tell us how you really feel. Watch it, because if that's how people get to know you, is electronically, you may not be that way. Respect other people's privacy. All right? Well, and that goes whether you're online or you're not online. Don't abuse your power. Knowing more than others or having more power than they do does not give you the right to take advantage of other people. For example, somebody who's an administrator should never read private email. In fact, in most cases at least, that's against the law. Be forgiving of other people's mistakes. Just like people can misspeak, just like I can get mad and maybe say something in the heat of anger, I could also get mad and send an email in the heat of anger. You may have heard this saying before, that if you're really mad at someone, write them a letter, but don't mail it. In much the same way, what I've done already when I'm really upset with somebody is I write them an email, but I don't write it in like Outlook or something like that where I could actually send it. I'll just write it in Notepad, and I'll read it, and a lot of times that'll help me get over my anger. Not always, all right, but at least sometimes. All right, so don't link to other people's documents, especially right on your web page. If you at least open it up in a new blank window so people don't think it's your stuff. Okay? All right. We've talked before about the telephone and text message media, that if you put that in, normally it'll pop up on the screen, and if you're in it with a mobile device, it'll show you a hyperlink, and it'll say to you basically, do you want to make the call? So if you click the link, it'll make the call for you. Sprites are they're designed to be very small little images that you can use for effect. Notice we've got sprites here. Now we're not going to go over sprites really in much detail at all in this class, but we will talk about them in other classes as you go on in here. All right, in this chapter, I'm going over virtually none, just so you know, virtually none of the lab. I'm not going over any of the stuff that they put in here. I'm just talking you through a few things. If you want to know more about Sprites, there are some, right there are some different sites that you can check out if you have an interest. Okay? All right, I did want to talk a little bit about this 3-column layout that the author has in there. And this is practice 7.3. If you give me a second, I'm trying to turn up to it in my book. And there's practice, actually, this is section 7.3. There's practice 7.5, which is maybe the longest one in the book, I believe. It's on pages 305, 306, 307, 308, 309, and 310. All right, and what they mention here is in the past we've looked at a 2-column layout where everything is inside of our container, and before we had our nav bar, and then inside of here, all right, we had our content area, and underneath that was our footer. But now what they're saying is we can have our nav, we can have our main, and we can have an aside here. All right, so we can have maybe other news here that's related to this, or maybe semi-related to it. What they do in some sites is they put advertising in there. There's a lot of different things that can be done here. All right, and I wanted to try to bring up the author's, let's see, student data files for Chapter 7 and Xbox query sprites flowers starters. I don't think that's it. Well, let's look. Okay, this is the 3-column. So you've got your header up on top. All right. You've got this down here, which is your navigation area. This is your content area that's in here. And this is your aside area that's in here. Now, I have no idea if the stuff that's in here actually, you can actually link to it. Skip the content. I don't even know. I don't think that goes anywhere. All right. But what you're starting to see is rather than just having 2 columns, you have 3. So the author goes through in much detail how she sets this stuff up. All right? So with the practice, and I'm just going to quickly walk you through it. So code the HTML. So in other words, I'm going to stop for a second. So as you look at this, all right, what you'll notice is we've got a div here. That's our container. There's our header. There's our navigation area underneath that. Then we have an aside. All right, and I think we might even have another aside. I don't know if there's 1 or 2 in here. But those things right here with the class, all that other stuff, all right, those asides, I believe those are these things that are right here. And we don't worry when we're setting this stuff up. We don't worry about where it's going to be positioned because that's what we're going to handle later with our CSS. All right? So again, she sets everything up and it looks like this when you start. Not very good because why? Because there's absolutely no CSS set up with it. All right? So again, this stuff is going to be way over here. That's going to cover all this. This skip to content will be over here. The picture will be somewhere over there. These 2 things, this ridges and this other things, are going to be over here. And the other stuff, the Dora County, that's going to be in the content area over here. So they code the basic CSS next. All right? Again, I'm not going to run through that with you. But you'll notice there's a left column and a right column. And the left is floated to the left and the right is floated to the right. All right? Once you get done, you've got this. Now, a lot of the stuff that's in here you're going to already recognize. You know now how to get rid of the dots. You know now how to get rid of the underlines. It's not a whole, it's not rocket science in order to do all that stuff. So we add some more CSS. And then we test. Now, one thing, the next section that's in here talks about styling for print. All right? And it's very important. It says even though we've been a paperless society, the fact is many people still love paper. For years, I shouldn't say for years, for a year, I was an electronic data interchange programmer analyst for Woodward Governor Company in Rockford, Illinois. And EDI, electronic data interchange, means paperless. Most companies that went paperless ended up printing out more paper than they did before they went paperless, which sounds very strange, but it's true. I went to a presentation on a paperless society that was given by a representative of a paper company. And I talked to him afterwards, and that's what I asked him, and he just laughed. He said, on average, when people go paperless, they ended up printing about 1 1/3 times as much as they did before they went paperless, because people just couldn't believe that they needed the feel good of having a paper copy in their hands. So when you style for print, the key thing is, let's back up a little. When I style for print, and I'm going to back up, come on. All right, when I style for print, do I really need all that? Or would it be fine to have a white background, none of the pictures, just the Door County wildflowers in black, and all of this information without the pictures, they can still be formatted, but just in black and white. And that's typically what you're going to be looking for. So you set up, usually at least, you're going to set up 2 different CSS files. One that'll handle your screen, and one that'll handle your print. All right, and don't worry about the handheld one right now. That's not really how it's handled right now. So notice, there's the one, media equals screen. There's another one, media equals print. All right, so some of the best styles, and this is pretty good, what the author puts in here. All right, this is on page 311. Starts on 311. Hide non-essential contact, and I already mentioned some of that for you. Especially if you've got, do you really need to print out that? Do you really need to print out that graphic type of thing? Configure font size and color for printing. It looks one way on the screen, but it'll look another way when you print it out. Use the CSS page break before or page break after if you have to keep certain things on the same page. All right. It says, consider whether a person would find it useful to see the actual URL. Okay? So if we got that stuff in there, do you want to actually show the URLs? So notice they've cut this way down. They still have the pictures. You might want to keep them in, you might not want to. They still keep the color. You might want to keep that in, you might not want to. Remember, if you're going to print this on a black and white printer, all right, that it's going to come out black and white anyway, regardless. There might be different gray tones, etc. And if these are very intricate types of images, they're going to take up a lot of toner from your copier. So just be real leery of that. You can do this in many different ways. All right, so they have you go through another exercise of styling it for print in the hands-on practice 7.6 on pages 313 and 314. All right, I'm going to quickly go over sections 7.5, 7.6, and 7.7, so we'll get through the media query stuff, or at least most of it, but then we talk about Flexbox, and I want to spend much more time talking about Flexbox and really flexible images, which starts on 324, than the author actually spends. All right, the author gives the rest of the chapter, so it starts on 324 and it goes, it's maybe 10 pages, but a lot of it is just pictures and code. So I want to talk, the Flexbox stuff is really 328, 329, and 330, and then there's an exercise. I want to spend a lot more time on that. All right? And that we will have some exercises for that. So, designing for the mobile web. I'm on the bottom of page 315. It says, Chapter 5 introduced you to 3 methods that can be used to provide access for website visitors using mobile devices. One option is to design and publish a second website. All right? Another option is to design and publish a separate website within your own domain that's optimized for mobile use. And as it says, that's what the White House does. All right? And then the third option is to configure one website with separate design for mobile and for desktop browser display. All right? So they say before we're even going to talk about which one of these we're going to use, let's talk about some best practices. This is a rehash of stuff I talked about earlier when we went over the actual PowerPoints. Remember, you've got a smaller screen size. Now, although some tablets are 10 inches wide, all right, most are not. 7 is a popular size, all right, and if you've got a mobile phone, it's going to be a lot smaller than that. You've got a low bandwidth. You've got a slow connection speed. You might drop in and out of a Wi-Fi. All right, your battery might be going. There's all sorts of stuff. You might have font color and media issues. All right, it's awkward. If you've ever tried to sit there and send a text really fast, if you're a young kid, you probably can do it. If you're an older person like myself, it's a little bit harder. So they talk about here optimizing a layout for a mobile site. With most sites, what you end up having, not all, but quite often what you end up having if you're going to create a site for mobile is basically it looks like it's just one big page and stuff that's on top of other stuff, and you just flick your way through it. That's normally the way it is, rather than you having to constantly move from page to page as you do in a desktop or laptop environment. All right, normally what you have in a mobile environment rather is everything looks as though it's on one page. All right, limit scrolling into one direction. In other words, don't swipe left, don't swipe right, up and down type of an idea. Use heading elements. Organize information so that it makes sense. Avoid tables. Provide labels for form controls. All right. Avoid absolute positioning. Hide content that you don't need to show the user. Again, it might be a really cool looking graphic, but it might not even mean anything if a person sees it on their mobile phone. The WC3, try that again, the W3C recommends you provide some kind of navigation at the top of the page and that it be consistent. Optimize your graphics for use. You can read this stuff yourselves. Optimize your text for use. So this is what you might find for a mobile display, and you'd want it probably, you want to show everything or you want it more like this. There's a lot of different things. So they start talking about this viewport tag, and actually this is probably, this might be 3 lectures. So I think that right here on page 318, this is a good time to stop right now.